I'm Audrey, 35, and I never truly understood what family meant until I lost almost everything. When my sister-in-law Kimberly mocked me at her wedding, saying, "Thanks for coming. Now start cleaning the tables," I felt my world crumble. When her mother called my son brainless, while everyone laughed, I thought I'd die of shame. But then my 12-year-old Noah asked for the microphone and said, "I have a surprise for the bride." What happened next changed our lives forever. Before I tell you how my son turned my greatest humiliation into the most vindicating moment of my life, leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories of triumph over betrayal. My father Howard was everything to me. A self-made businessman who built a successful construction company from nothing. He always told me and my brother Aaron that his greatest achievement wasn't his wealth, but raising children who knew the value of hard work and family. When I'm gone, he'd say during our Sunday dinners, "Everything I've built will be split equally between you two. Not because you deserve it, but because you're both my legacy." I believed him without question. Why wouldn't I? My father had never broken a promise to me in 35 years. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was helping Noah with his breakfast before school when my phone lit up with Aaron's number. My stomach dropped immediately. Aaron rarely called, preferring to communicate through his wife Kimberly's meticulously planned family events. "Dad's had a heart attack," Aaron said, his voice unnaturally controlled. "They've taken him to Memorial Hospital." "It's bad, Audrey." I remember dropping the phone, my hands shaking so badly that Noah had to pick it up. I grabbed my purse, told Noah to get in the car, and drove faster than I ever had before. All I could think was that I needed to get there in time to say goodbye. But I didn't. By the time Noah and I ran through those hospital doors, my father was already gone. Aaron stood talking to a doctor, his posture rigid as always. When he saw us, something flickered across his face, something I couldn't identify at the time but now recognize as calculation. "He went quickly," Aaron said, not bothering with a hug or any comfort. "We need to start making arrangements." Looking back, I should have noticed how he said "we" but meant "I." How he immediately took control, speaking to the hospital staff as if he were the only family member present. But grief has a way of blinding you to red flags. What you need to understand about my life before this moment is that I was already familiar with loss. My husband James had died in a car accident 7 years earlier, leaving me to raise Noah alone. The grief had nearly destroyed me, but I'd rebuilt our lives piece by piece, finding work at a local department store that allowed me flexible hours to care for Noah. Noah had struggled after his father's death. He developed learning difficulties that made school challenging. Some doctors suggested it was related to the trauma. Others said he might have always had these issues, but they became more pronounced during emotional distress. Whatever the cause, my brilliant, kind-hearted boy needed extra support, which meant extra expenses I could barely afford. Aaron and Kimberly, with their perfect house and perfect careers, he followed in Dad's footsteps in construction management while she worked in real estate, never tried to hide their disapproval of my life choices. To them, my modest apartment and retail job were embarrassments. They viewed Noah's learning disability as something I had somehow caused through poor parenting. If you had pushed him harder instead of babying him after James died, he wouldn't be struggling now, Kimberly once told me during a family Christmas, her voice sweet as poison. In the funeral home the next day, I sat quietly while Aaron discussed arrangements with the director, a somber man named Frank who kept addressing only my brother despite my presence. When I tried to suggest that Dad would have wanted his fishing buddies to speak at the service, Aaron cut me off. "I'm handling this, Audrey. Dad put me in charge of his affairs for a reason." At the time, I assumed he meant because he was the oldest, or because he was less emotional than me. It never occurred to me that my father would have deliberately excluded me from decisions about his final arrangements. Why would it? We'd always been close, closer than he and Aaron in many ways. The funeral was beautiful in that terrible way that good funerals are. Hundreds came, business associates, friends, former employees who shared stories about my father's generosity and integrity. Noah stayed glued to my side, his small hand in mine providing strength I desperately needed. Aaron delivered a polished eulogy that sounded more like a business presentation than a son's farewell. Kimberly sat in the front row in an expensive black dress that looked newly purchased, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I spoke too, my voice breaking as I told the story of how Dad taught me to fish, how he never missed a school play or recital, how he called me every Sunday night just to check in until the week he died. Throughout it all, I noticed Aaron watching me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Not grief, not sympathy, but something calculating, as if he were tallying up something in his head. The will reading is scheduled for Friday, he told me as people filed out of the church. Gregory's office at 2. Don't be late. Gregory had been my father's attorney for decades. I'd met him many times at family events, had always found him professional if a bit cold. I assumed the reading would be a formality, painful but straightforward. Dad had always been organized about his affairs, transparent about his intentions. How wrong I was. Gregory's office was housed in an imposing downtown building, all glass and steel and importance. Noah had a half day at school, so he came with me, sitting quietly beside me in the reception area, a dog-eared book about space exploration open on his lap. He'd been fascinated by astronomy since James had first shown him the constellations years ago. Aaron and Kimberly arrived exactly on time, both dressed like they were heading to a business meeting rather than a family matter. Kimberly barely acknowledged me, but she ruffled Noah's hair in that condescending way adults sometimes do with children they don't respect. "How's school, buddy? Still having trouble with those multiplication tables?" she asked. Though Noah was well beyond basic multiplication and currently studying pre-algebra concepts despite his learning challenges. "I'm reading about black holes," Noah replied quietly, not looking up from his book. Gregory welcomed us into his office, a space that smelled of leather and money. He offered perfunctory condolences before getting straight to business, opening a folder containing what I assumed was my father's will. "As you know, Howard Anderson was a meticulous man who gave careful thought to the disposition of his assets," Gregory began, his voice emotionless. "I'll now read his last will and testament, executed and signed 3 weeks before his passing." 3 weeks. Something about that time frame niggled at my memory. But before I could place it, Gregory continued. "I, Howard James Anderson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath all my worldly possessions, including but not limited to my business holdings, real estate properties, financial accounts, and personal effects, to my son, Aaron Michael Anderson." The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning penetrated my shock. "I'm sorry," I interrupted, certain I'd misheard. "Could you repeat that part?" Gregory looked annoyed at the interruption but complied. "Mr. Anderson left his entire estate, valued at approximately $2.8 million, to his son Aaron. There are no other beneficiaries named in this document." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Noah's hand found mine, squeezing tight. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Dad always said he would split everything equally between us." "Always." Aaron cleared his throat. "Dad changed his mind, obviously. He told me he was concerned about your financial decision-making. He wanted to make sure Noah would be provided for properly, and he didn't trust you to manage a large inheritance." The casual cruelty of his words struck me like a physical blow. I turned to Gregory. "This can't be right. My father would never do this." Gregory's expression remained neutral. "The will is legally executed, Ms. Anderson. Your father was examined by his physician the same day and declared competent to make these decisions." "When exactly was this will signed?" I asked, that 3-week time frame still bothering me. "February 12th, Gregory replied after checking the document. The date hit me like a thunderbolt. February 12th was when Dad had been hospitalized briefly for complications from his blood pressure medication. Aaron had been the one to take him to the hospital. He'd told me it wasn't serious enough to worry me about. He was on medication that day, I said slowly. Strong medication that affected his thinking. Aaron's face hardened. "Are you suggesting I took advantage of our father?" "That's low, even for you, Audrey." "I'm suggesting that something isn't right here," I replied, my voice gaining strength. Dad would never cut me out completely. Never. Kimberly sighed dramatically. Howard was concerned about Noah's future. Let's be honest, Audrey. The boy has challenges. Without proper management of those resources, they could be squandered on ineffective treatments instead of invested wisely for his long-term care. Don't talk about my son like he's not sitting right here, I snapped, protective fury rising in me. Mom, it's okay, Noah whispered, though I could feel him trembling beside me. Aaron leaned forward. Dad made his decision. He knew I would look out for both of you if necessary. But frankly, your constant financial struggles, despite all the help we've given you over the years, prove to him that you're not responsible enough for this level of inheritance. What help? I nearly shouted. You've never helped us. Not once since James died. We've had to watch you make one bad decision after another, Aaron continued as if I hadn't spoken. Working that dead-end job instead of going back to college like Dad offered to pay for. Wasting money on all those specialists for Noah when Dad's insurance would have covered standard treatment. He's not going to be normal no matter how much you spend, Audrey. He'll always be a burden. The room went deadly silent. Even Kimberly looked shocked at Aaron's words. Noah's face had gone completely white, his eyes fixed on the floor. Get out, I told my son quietly. Go wait in the hallway, please. For once, Noah didn't argue. He slipped out silently, closing the door behind him. I turned back to my brother, a cold fury replacing my shock. You will never speak about my son that way again. Ever. Noah is brilliant and kind and worth 10 of you. Dad knew that. He loved Noah. Dad was practical, Aaron countered. He knew the boy would need long-term support, and he didn't trust you to provide it. I'm executor of the estate now, and I'll make decisions about what support, if any, you receive going forward. I stood up, gathering my purse. I'll contest this. Dad wasn't in his right mind when he signed this will. Gregory cleared his throat. You're certainly entitled to challenge the will, Ms. Anderson. However, I should inform you that such challenges typically cost between $50,000 and $100,000 in legal fees, with no guarantee of success. The amount might as well have been $1 billion. I had less than $5,000 in savings. I'll find a way, I said, though my confidence was already faltering. Aaron smiled thinly. Good luck with that on a department store salary. I walked out without another word, finding Noah sitting on a bench in the hallway, his book closed in his lap. Is it true? He asked quietly as we walked to the elevator. Did Grandpa really think I was a burden? My heart broke all over again. Absolutely not, honey. Grandpa adored you. Something isn't right about this whole situation. But even as I reassured my son, doubt crept in. Had my father really lost faith in me so completely? Had he seen me as such a failure that he believed I couldn't be trusted with my own inheritance? That night, after Noah went to bed, I consulted with Patricia, a lawyer I could barely afford who specialized in estate law. She confirmed what Gregory had implied. Contesting the will would be expensive, time-consuming, and difficult to win without clear evidence of coercion or incompetence. If your father was examined by a doctor the same day and declared competent, that creates a significant hurdle, she explained gently. And if there were previous discussions about concerns over your financial management, that would further complicate things. I spent that night crying silently into my pillow, questioning everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my father. Had I disappointed him so deeply without realizing it? Had all those Sunday calls and warm visits been a facade, hiding his true disappointment in me? In the morning, I found Noah sitting at our small kitchen table, his eyes red-rimmed from his own silent tears. We don't need Grandpa's money, he said with a determination that surprised me. We were okay before, and we'll be okay now. Looking at my son, so young but carrying wisdom beyond his years, I made my decision. I would walk away. Not because Aaron deserved to win, but because Noah deserved a mother who wasn't consumed by bitterness and a lengthy legal battle we couldn't afford. You're right, I told him, kissing the top of his head. We're going to be just fine. I didn't know then how prophetic Noah's words would prove to be, or that walking away would be just the beginning of finding our way back. 6 months after the will reading, Noah and I moved to a smaller apartment across town. I couldn't bear to stay in our old place, where every corner held memories of visits from my father, him fixing the leaky faucet, building Noah a bookshelf, bringing groceries when money was tight. The new place was nothing special, just a two-bedroom unit in a slightly shabby complex, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it was ours. A fresh start. I'd left my job at the department store, partly because I couldn't face running into Kimberly's friends who shopped there, always ready with their pitying looks and backhanded comments. Instead, I found work at a community center that offered programs for children with various learning differences. The pay was even less than retail, but the director, a warm-hearted woman named Dorothy, offered flexibility with my hours and genuine understanding about Noah's needs. We all have different ways of learning, she told me during my interview. Some kids just need different approaches to unlock their potential. It was the first time in years that someone other than me had spoken about Noah's challenges as potential rather than deficit. I nearly cried on the spot. Noah started at a new school with a specialized program for students with learning differences. At his previous school, he'd been treated as slow, struggling to keep up with standardized testing that never showcased his true abilities. Here, his teacher Benjamin recognized something in Noah that others had missed. Your son has an extraordinary memory for conversations, Benjamin told me during our first parent-teacher conference. He can recall almost verbatim discussions from weeks ago. Have you noticed this at home? I had, but I'd always considered it just one of Noah's quirks. He remembered exactly what I said I wanted for Christmas 3 years ago. He could recite movie dialogue after a single viewing. He recalled phone numbers without writing them down. He struggles with written material sometimes, Benjamin continued. But his auditory processing and recall are off the charts. We're adapting his curriculum to build on these strengths while supporting his challenges. For the first time since James died, I felt like someone truly saw my son. At the community center, I formed a friendship with Heather, a program coordinator who quickly became the sister I'd never had. Unlike Kimberly, who had always treated me with barely disguised contempt, Heather was genuinely kind, offering to watch Noah when I worked late and including us in her family gatherings. Blood doesn't make family, she told me once as we watched Noah playing with her children. Love does. And that kid of yours has enough love in his heart to power a small city. Slowly, we built a life based on what we had rather than what we'd lost. I started a support group for single parents of children with learning differences, finding solidarity and practical advice from others who understood our challenges. Noah joined a science club that embraced his fascination with astronomy and physics. We were by no means wealthy. I still counted pennies at the grocery store and bought clothes at thrift shops, but we were stable. Content, even. As the months passed, Noah's unique memory abilities became more apparent. He could remember dates, numbers, and conversations with startling accuracy. When Benjamin suggested we keep a journal documenting these skills, patterns emerged. Noah struggled with written language and certain mathematical concepts, but his recall of spoken information was nearly photographic. He's not disabled, Benjamin told me firmly. He's differently abled. And in some ways, extraordinarily abled. Noah began to flourish under this new understanding. His confidence grew as his teachers found ways to adapt their instruction to his learning style. Instead of written tests, he gave oral presentations. When concepts were explained aloud rather than assigned as reading, he grasped them quickly. One evening, as we walked home from the community center, Noah surprised me by reciting, word for word, a conversation I'd had with my father nearly 2 years earlier. You were in the kitchen making spaghetti, he said. Grandpa called, and you put him on speaker while you stirred the sauce. He said he was updating his will and wanted to make sure you knew that half of everything would go to you and half to Uncle Aaron. You told him you didn't want to talk about him dying. And he laughed and said, I'm not planning on it anytime soon, sweetheart, but a man my age needs to have his affairs in order. Then you asked if he wanted to come for dinner. And he said he couldn't because he had a poker game with Mr. Lester from down the street. I stopped walking, staring at my son in amazement. Noah, that's exactly right. How do you remember that so clearly? He shrugged, looking down at his shoes. I remember everything I hear, especially important things. And how did you know that was important? Because Grandpa said half for you and half for Uncle Aaron. But that's not what happened, is it? Uncle Aaron got everything. The simple truth of his observation hit me like a wave. My father had told me his intentions directly, and Noah had witnessed it. For the first time since the will reading, absolute certainty replaced my nagging doubt. Something was very wrong with that will. But by then, Aaron had already taken control of our father's business, sold his house, and consolidated the assets. The time for a legal challenge had passed, and frankly, our new life was too precious to risk disrupting with a bitter court battle. You're right, I told Noah, squeezing his hand. But we're doing okay without that money, aren't we? He nodded thoughtfully. Yeah, but it's not right. Grandpa wouldn't like it. No, I agreed. He wouldn't. What I didn't realize then was that Noah wasn't just making an observation. He was making a plan. The invitation arrived almost a year after my father's death. Thick cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing announcing Aaron and Kimberly's vow renewal ceremony on their 10th anniversary. I stared at it in disbelief, wondering why they would include me after everything that had happened. Are we going? Noah asked, peering over my shoulder at the invitation. Absolutely not, I replied, tossing it toward the recycling bin. The idea of watching Aaron and Kimberly celebrate their perfect life, funded in part by my stolen inheritance, made my stomach turn. To my surprise, Noah retrieved the invitation. I think we should go. I looked at my son like he'd suggested we vacation on Mars. Why on earth would we put ourselves through that? He shrugged. That increasingly familiar, thoughtful expression on his face. I just think it might be important. Important how? To watch Uncle Aaron flaunt Dad's money? To have Kimberly and her friends look down their noses at us? No, thank you. Please, Mom, Noah persisted with unusual determination. I've never asked to see them before. Just this once. His insistence puzzled me. Noah had never been close to Aaron or Kimberly, even before the inheritance dispute. If anything, he'd always seemed uncomfortable around them. I discussed it with Heather over coffee the next day. I can't figure out why he wants to go. It makes no sense. Heather's expression darkened. It makes no sense for them to invite you either. After how they treated you. I don't trust it. Maybe they're feeling guilty, I suggested, though I didn't really believe it. Or maybe they want to parade you around like they've magnanimously reconciled with poor, pitiful Audrey, Heather countered. I wouldn't put it past them to use you for their image. Her assessment aligned with my own suspicions. Yet Noah's unusual insistence still puzzled me. Benjamin offered a different perspective when I mentioned it during our next parent-teacher conference. Sometimes facing the people who hurt us can be empowering, he suggested. Maybe Noah wants to show them that you're both doing well despite everything. We're doing okay, but hardly thriving, I admitted. I'm still paycheck to paycheck. We're not going to impress anyone. Benjamin's kind eyes met mine. Success isn't measured in dollars, Audrey. You've built a beautiful life for your son. You've shown incredible resilience. That's worth more than any inheritance. His words warmed something in me that had been cold for a long time. Benjamin had become more than just Noah's teacher over the past months. He'd become a friend, someone I looked forward to seeing at school functions and community events. Sometimes I caught him looking at me in a way that made me wonder if he might feel the same connection. As I wavered on the decision, I began hearing rumors through community connections about Aaron's business ventures. He'd expanded my father's construction company aggressively, taking on luxury development projects that seemed flashy but increasingly risky. There were whispers about investor concerns and regulatory scrutiny. None of this surprised me. Aaron had always been ambitious but reckless, taking shortcuts my father never would have approved. I also noticed Noah's behavior growing more secretive. He spent hours on our home computer, closing windows when I walked into the room. I found him making phone calls when he thought I wasn't home, speaking in hushed tones. When I asked who he was talking to, he simply said, "Just a school project, Mom." Under normal circumstances, I might have worried more about this behavior, but Noah had earned my trust. Whatever he was doing, I knew it wasn't harmful. He wasn't that kind of kid. Still, his sudden interest in Aaron and Kimberly's celebration remained a mystery. 2 weeks before the event, I finally relented. Okay, we can go to the vow renewal. But we're leaving at the first sign of trouble, understand? Noah's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since before my father died. Thanks, Mom. You won't regret it. Somehow, his certainty only increased my apprehension. We shopped at a consignment store for appropriate outfits. Me in a simple blue dress that Benjamin once mentioned brought out my eyes. Noah in khaki pants and a button-down shirt that made him look older than his 13 years. I couldn't afford to spend much, but I was determined we would look dignified, not desperate. The night before the ceremony, I found Noah in his room surrounded by papers. Notes written in his careful handwriting, printed documents, and what looked like transcripts of conversations. What's all this? I asked, picking up one of the papers. Noah quickly gathered everything into a folder. Just getting organized for tomorrow. Noah, I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. What's going on? This doesn't seem like you. He looked at me for a long moment, then said something that chilled me. Sometimes you have to let people think they've won before they can really lose. Where did you hear that? Grandpa said it once. About a business deal. I studied my son's face, seeing shadows of both his father and my father there, the same determined set of his jaw, the same intelligent eyes. For the first time, I wondered if I had underestimated not just his abilities, but his understanding of everything that had happened. Noah, we're not going to this ceremony for revenge, I said carefully. That's not who we are. Not revenge, he corrected. Justice. There's a difference. I left his room that night with a strange feeling, part worry, part wonder. My little boy wasn't so little anymore, and he understood far more than I'd given him credit for. Whatever Noah had planned for the vow renewal ceremony, I had a feeling our lives were about to change again. The venue for Aaron and Kimberly's vow renewal was exactly what I'd expected, an exclusive country club overlooking the city, with manicured gardens and a ballroom that probably cost more for one night than my annual rent. I gripped Noah's hand as we approached the entrance, already feeling out of place despite our carefully chosen outfits. We can still change our minds, I whispered to him as a uniformed valet took the keys to my 15-year-old sedan with barely concealed disdain. We belong here as much as anyone, Noah replied with surprising conviction. Grandpa would want us here. The guest list was extensive, at least 200 people milling about in designer clothes, drinking champagne from crystal flutes. I recognized some of my father's old friends and business associates, most of whom had stopped calling after the will reading. They nodded awkwardly when they saw me. Their expression, but because she'd hoped Kimberly would marry someone from their country club set rather than the son of a self-made contractor, no matter how successful. Audrey, she said, air kissing near my cheek. How unexpected to see you here. And Noah too. She glanced at my son with the barest acknowledgement before turning back to me. Kimberly mentioned you might come. So brave of you, considering everything. Her emphasis on everything made it clear she knew all about the inheritance situation, likely Kimberly's version of it. We wouldn't miss celebrating with family, I replied with a smile that strained my facial muscles. Of course. Family is so important, she agreed insincerely. You'll find your place card at table 23. In the back. The furthest table from the head table, naturally. As Margaret walked away, I whispered to Noah. Last chance to leave with our dignity intact. Not yet, he said, that same determined look on his face. We need to stay through the dinner at least. The ceremony itself was elaborate and showy, Kimberly in a gown that probably cost more than a year of Noah's special education services, Aaron looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo. They renewed vows that emphasized prosperity and success more than love. I sat in the back row, trying to remain invisible, while Noah watched with unusual intensity, as if memorizing every detail. At the reception, we found our assigned table populated with distant acquaintances and what appeared to be obligation invites, elderly relatives no one wanted to talk to. A couple of Aaron's employees too junior to merit better placement. No one seemed particularly interested in speaking to the disinherited sister and her slow son, which suited me fine. I picked at my dinner, counting the minutes until we could politely leave, when Aaron approached our table. He'd been making rounds, accepting congratulations and slapping backs like a politician at a fundraiser. "Audrey. Noah. Glad you could make it," he said, his voice carrying just enough for nearby tables to hear his graciousness toward his less fortunate relatives. "Congratulations," I replied neutrally. "It's a beautiful event." "Kimberly deserves the best," he said with a meaningful glance around the opulent room. "We've been blessed with success this year." The implication was clear: success funded by my father's money. I bit back a sharp response, reminding myself we were here for Noah's sake, though I still couldn't understand why. "How's the community center job working out?" Aaron asked with exaggerated concern. "Must be quite an adjustment after the department store." "I love it," I answered honestly. "Making a difference in children's lives is incredibly rewarding." Something like annoyance flickered across his face. He'd been hoping for envy or resentment, not contentment. "Well, if you ever need help making ends meet," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "We're doing just fine," I interrupted. "But thank you for your concern." Aaron nodded stiffly and moved on, clearly dissatisfied with my refusal to play the role of pitiable poor relation. After dinner came speeches, Kimberly's father toasting their continued prosperity, friends sharing carefully scripted anecdotes about the perfect couple. Then Aaron stood, champagne in hand, to thank everyone for coming. "Kimberly and I are blessed not just with 10 wonderful years together, but with success beyond our expectations," he announced. "My father always taught me that prosperity comes to those who are smart enough to seize opportunities, and I've honored his memory by growing the family business to new heights this year." I gripped my water glass so tightly I feared it might shatter. My father had actually taught us that prosperity comes to those who work hard and treat others fairly, values Aaron had apparently forgotten. As servers began clearing dinner plates, Kimberly made her way to our table, champagne sloshing in her glass, her smile brittle with insincerity. "Audrey, I'm so glad you could witness our special day," she said loudly. "Since you're already here, would you mind helping the staff clear some of these tables? You have experience with that sort of thing now, don't you?" Several nearby guests laughed, and heat rushed to my face as I realized the true purpose of our invitation: not reconciliation, but humiliation. "Thanks for coming," Kimberly continued, her voice carrying across the now quieting room. "Now start cleaning the tables." I sat frozen, unable to form a response as more people turned to watch my public degradation. Noah's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tightly. Margaret appeared beside her daughter, swaying slightly from too much champagne. "You should use your brainless child to clean the tables too," she added with a cruel laugh. "It's all he'll be good for anyway." The room erupted in laughter, some uncomfortable, some genuinely amused at our expense. I felt tears threatening and began gathering my purse, ready to flee this nightmare. But Noah stood up. "Excuse me," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "May I use the microphone for a moment? I have a surprise for the bride." My heart stopped. "Noah, don't," I whispered urgently. But he was already walking toward the small stage where a band was setting up for dancing. Kimberly looked annoyed, but also amused at the prospect of further entertainment at our expense. "Well, isn't this precious?" she said to nearby guests. "The little retard wants to make a speech." I moved to intercept Noah, but Benjamin suddenly appeared beside me. Benjamin, who definitely hadn't been on the guest list. "Wait," he said quietly. "Trust him." Before I could ask what he was doing there, Noah had reached the microphone. The room fell silent as my 13-year-old son adjusted the stand to his height and looked out at the crowd of wealthy, judgmental adults. "I'd like to thank everyone for being here today," he began, his voice clear and confident in a way I'd never heard before. "Especially since so many of you are about to become witnesses in a criminal investigation." The silence in the room deepened to something like shock. "You see," Noah continued, "I have a very special gift. I remember everything I hear. Every word, every conversation. Exactly as it happened." And I've been listening very carefully for the past year. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear over its rhythm. What was happening? For example, Noah said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a small digital recorder. I remember when Uncle Aaron visited Grandpa in the hospital on February 12th, the day he supposedly signed a new will. He pressed play and Aaron's voice filled the ballroom. Just sign these papers, Dad. It's just routine insurance stuff while you're in here. Nothing to worry about. My father's voice. Slurred from medication. Can it wait? They've given me something, feeling foggy. Aaron again. It needs your signature today. I'll handle everything. Just sign where I've marked. Noah stopped the recording and looked directly at Aaron, whose face had drained of all color. That doesn't sound like someone knowingly changing their will, does it? Kimberly rushed toward the stage. Turn that off immediately. This is our celebration, not some platform for your lies. Noah ignored her. I also remember a phone call Uncle Aaron made 3 weeks later when Grandpa was asking questions about the papers he signed. He played another recording, Aaron's voice again. Don't worry about those hospital papers, Dad. Like I said, just routine insurance forms. Your will is still the same as always, split between me and Audrey. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Margaret was now clutching the back of a chair for support, her previous smugness replaced by open alarm. Noah, that's enough, I said, finally finding my voice and moving toward the stage. I had no idea how he'd obtained these recordings or what else he planned to reveal, but I was terrified of the consequences. Almost done, Mom, he said with remarkable composure. There's someone here who wants to speak with Uncle Aaron. As if on cue, an older man in a suit stepped forward from near the entrance. I recognized him instantly, Edward Jameson. My father's oldest friend and a prominent attorney who had retired around the same time Dad started talking about stepping back from his business. Aaron Anderson, Edward said, his authoritative voice cutting through the stunned silence. I've been working with Noah for the past 6 months, gathering evidence of what appears to be a clear case of fraud and elder abuse. Howard Anderson named me as executor in his actual last will and testament, which I have secured from his safety deposit box. The document you presented to the family was fabricated, and we have substantial evidence to prove it. Aaron lunged toward Noah, his face contorted with rage. You little freak. How dare you? Benjamin stepped between them, moving with surprising speed. I wouldn't do that if I were you, he said quietly. Assaulting a minor in front of 200 witnesses would just add to your legal troubles. I finally understood why Benjamin was there. Noah had enlisted his help, had been working with him and Edward all along. My son, who everyone had underestimated, including me. This is absurd. Kimberly shrieked, looking desperately around the room. These are lies. Aaron would never. I have copies of the original will. Medical records showing Howard was on disorienting medication when the fraudulent will was signed, and testimony from his doctor confirming he was not competent to make legal decisions that day. Edward continued calmly. Noah has provided recordings documenting a pattern of deception that will be very compelling in court. The room erupted in chaos, guests standing in shock. Servers frozen with trays, photographers capturing a very different kind of memory than planned. Margaret crumpled into a chair, while Aaron stood pale and rigid, a muscle twitching violently in his jaw. Noah stepped down from the stage and returned to my side, slipping his hand into mine as if we'd just finished a routine school presentation rather than blown up our family forever. I told you we needed to stay through dinner, he said simply. The next few minutes unfolded like a scene from a movie I couldn't quite believe I was part of. Security guards appeared, presumably called by Kimberly or Aaron, but Edward calmly informed them that removing us would constitute interference in an active fraud investigation. They retreated in confusion while guests began murmuring among themselves, many discreetly heading for the exits to avoid the unfolding scandal. Noah remained surprisingly composed as he led me to a quiet corner of the ballroom where Benjamin and Edward joined us. My mind was reeling with questions, but before I could voice any of them, Noah began explaining. I started recording conversations after Grandpa died, he said matter-of-factly. I knew something was wrong. Grandpa always told me that when people are being dishonest, they say different things to different people. So I wanted to keep track. But how did you? I gestured helplessly at the small recorder he still held. Benjamin helped me get the right equipment. Noah explained, glancing gratefully at his teacher. Special microphones, recording software. We practiced a lot. Benjamin nodded. Noah came to me about 7 months ago with his concerns. He had already been keeping detailed notes of conversations he'd overheard between Aaron and Kimberly. His recall was extraordinary. Dates, exact wording, contexts. When he played me some initial recordings he'd made on his phone, I knew we needed to take him seriously. Edward stepped in. Benjamin contacted me as Howard's old friend. Noah shared his suspicions and initial evidence, and I began my own investigation. What we uncovered was disturbing, to say the least. I don't understand, I said. Still struggling to process everything. How did Noah get recordings of Aaron at the hospital? Or the phone calls? Noah looked down, suddenly less confident. I recorded Uncle Aaron's conversations whenever he was around us. After I noticed patterns, I started, following him sometimes. Following him? I repeated in disbelief. Just a few times. When you thought I was at science club, Noah admitted. I'd sit in the coffee shop across from his office or near them at restaurants. People don't notice kids much. I could sit pretty close with my backpack, and no one thought anything of it. Part of me was horrified at the risks he'd taken, while another part marveled at his determination and resourcefulness. That was incredibly dangerous, Noah, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Anything could have happened. I was careful, he insisted. And it was important. They stole from us, Mom. They lied about Grandpa. Before I could respond, commotion erupted across the room. Aaron was shouting at a small group of men in business attire who had apparently just arrived, men I recognized as investors in his new development projects. This is a private family event. Aaron was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Whatever Gregory told you can wait until Monday. Gregory didn't tell us anything, one of the men replied coldly. We received anonymous emails with documentation showing funds from your father's estate were misrepresented in our investment agreements. I looked questioningly at Noah, who shrugged. I found some papers in Uncle Aaron's briefcase when he visited us after the funeral. I made copies. Edward cleared his throat. That particular aspect of the investigation wasn't my recommendation, but it did accelerate matters. Across the room, Kimberly was frantically trying to salvage the situation, her voice rising shrilly above the growing chaos. Everyone, please. This is all a misunderstanding. The music is about to start, and we have a wonderful dessert planned. No one was listening. Guests were streaming toward the exits, phones out, undoubtedly spreading word of the scandal in real time. Margaret had disappeared entirely. The catering staff stood awkwardly by the untouched wedding cake, awaiting instructions that no one was giving. What happens now? I asked Edward. Legally? I've already filed to invalidate the fraudulent will. With the evidence we've gathered, the court will almost certainly reinstate Howard's original will, which splits his estate equally between you and Aaron, with special provisions for Noah's education. And Aaron? Edward's expression hardened. Fraud, elder abuse, and possibly embezzlement based on what we're learning about his business practices. The criminal implications are significant. I felt no satisfaction at this, only a profound sadness that it had come to this, that my brother had betrayed not just me but our father's trust so completely. Noah seemed to sense my thoughts. I didn't do this to hurt Uncle Aaron, Mom. I did it because it's what Grandpa would have wanted. He believed in fairness. Benjamin placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Your son is extraordinary, Audrey. Not despite his learning differences, but in many ways because of them. His unique memory and perspective allowed him to see patterns others missed. Why didn't you tell me what you were doing? I asked Noah, still trying to reconcile my perception of my sometimes struggling son with the methodical, determined investigator he'd apparently become. You would have worried, he said simply. And you might have tried to stop me. You always say we should take the high road. But sometimes the high road means fighting for what's right. My father's words, coming from my son's mouth. The realization brought tears to my eyes. Our moment of quiet was abruptly interrupted as Aaron pushed through the dispersing crowd toward us, his face twisted with fury. You think you've won? This isn't over. I'll fight this every step of the way. That's your right, Edward replied calmly. But consider your position carefully, Aaron. The evidence is substantial, and a public court battle will only expose your actions more broadly. Your investors are already questioning their partnerships. He's right, came a new voice. Gregory, my father's attorney, or the man who had presented himself as such during the will reading, had appeared, looking significantly less confident than when I'd last seen him. Aaron, we need to discuss damage control. Immediately. You're supposed to be on my side. Aaron snapped. Gregory glanced nervously at Edward. I advised you on the legal implications of presenting an alternate will. I never agreed to any claim that Howard was fully competent when signing. You examined him yourself. Aaron protested. I did no such thing, Gregory replied, backing away slightly. I specifically told you I couldn't be present for the signing because of ethical concerns. If you're suggesting I participated in misrepresenting your father's competence. Their argument continued. But security was now attempting to clear the room as the elegant celebration devolved into a scene of accusations and damage control. Benjamin gently guided Noah and me toward a side exit. I think you've both seen enough for one night. As we walked through the garden toward the parking area, I heard someone calling my name. Turning, I saw Kimberly hurrying after us. Her elaborate gown gathered in her hands to keep it from dragging on the ground. You've ruined everything, she hissed when she reached us, mascara streaking down her face. Are you happy now? I looked at this woman who had mocked my son, who had participated in stealing my inheritance, who had invited me to her celebration specifically to humiliate me. I felt no triumph. Only a weary sadness. No, Kimberly. I'm not happy that my brother betrayed our father's wishes and lied to everyone. I'm not happy that my son had to become an amateur detective at 13. But I am relieved that the truth is finally out. The truth, she scoffed. The truth is that Howard always preferred Aaron. Always. He just felt obligated to include you because you were such a mess after James died. Aaron just made official what Howard really wanted. Noah stepped forward. That's not true. I have recordings of Grandpa talking about Mom too. Want to hear them? Kimberly recoiled as if Noah had threatened her physically. Keep that freak away from me. You have no idea what you've done. Aaron's investors are leaving. Our reputation is ruined. You did that yourselves, Benjamin said quietly. Now I suggest you return to your guests. What's left of them? We watched as she stalked back toward the venue, a solitary figure in white against the darkening evening. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, Mom, Noah said as we continued walking. I didn't know how else to make it right. I pulled my son close, marveling at the strength and moral clarity in this boy everyone had underestimated. You have nothing to apologize for. I'm just sorry I didn't protect you better. You did protect me, he insisted. You taught me what's right. That's why I couldn't let them get away with it. As we reached my car, Benjamin hesitated. I should probably give you two some space after all this. Actually, I said, surprising myself with my steadiness, we could use a friend right now. Maybe we could all get some ice cream? I think we've earned it. Benjamin's smile was warm with something more than friendship. I think that sounds perfect. As we drove away from the country club, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the elegant building where my brother's carefully constructed facade had finally crumbled. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected for this evening. But perhaps it was the beginning we had needed all along. The weeks following the wedding confrontation passed in a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and quiet reckonings. Edward moved swiftly to invalidate the fraudulent will, presenting the evidence Noah had gathered along with affidavits from my father's doctor confirming he had been on disorienting medication when the false will was signed. The judge ruled in our favor without even requiring a full hearing. Meanwhile, the investigation into Aaron's business practices deepened. The concerns Noah's anonymous emails had raised with investors proved well-founded. Aaron had used our father's reputation and assets to secure funding for development projects that existed more on paper than in reality. As investors withdrew, the house of cards began collapsing. Edward discovered the original will in my father's safety deposit box, exactly where Noah remembered him saying it would be. Just as my father had always promised. He had split his estate equally between Aaron and me, with a special trust established for Noah's education. Your father was extremely proud of Noah, Edward told me as we reviewed the trust documents. He specified that the funds should support whatever educational path best nurtures his unique gifts. Howard clearly saw potential in Noah that others missed. The validation brought tears to my eyes. All those months of doubting my father's love and faith in us had been based on Aaron's deception, not reality. The legal process resulted in my receiving not just half of the original estate, but additional compensation for Aaron's misappropriation of funds that should have come to me a year earlier. Suddenly, after years of counting pennies, I had financial security. The irony wasn't lost on me. Aaron's attempt to portray me as financially irresponsible had ultimately given me the means to prove otherwise. Noah and I moved from our small apartment into a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom house with a backyard where he could set up the telescope my father had given him years ago. I continued working at the community center, not because I needed the income anymore, but because I genuinely loved the work and the difference we were making in children's lives. With Edward's guidance, I established a foundation focused on supporting children with learning differences, particularly those with exceptional memory abilities like Noah's. We named it the Howard Anderson Foundation for Exceptional Minds. Grandpa would like that, Noah said when I showed him the foundation's mission statement. He always said everyone has something special to offer if you look for it. Aaron's legal troubles mounted as the fraud investigation expanded. He and Kimberly sold their mansion and moved to a smaller house in a different city. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Kimberly had filed for divorce, unwilling to weather the social and financial downfall. I took no pleasure in their difficulties. Despite everything, Aaron was still my brother. And I remembered the closeness we'd shared as children before ambition and greed changed him. I arranged through Edward to ensure that Aaron wouldn't face jail time if he cooperated fully with investigators and made restitution to defrauded investors. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was the decision I could live with. Noah thrived in ways I had always hoped but scarcely dared believe possible. With proper support and understanding of his unique learning style, his academic performance improved dramatically. Benjamin continued working with him, helping develop techniques that leveraged his exceptional auditory memory while strengthening areas where he struggled. Benjamin became a fixture in our lives, first as Noah's mentor, then as my friend, and eventually as something more. Our first official date was to a planetarium exhibit Noah had been eager to see, hardly romantic by conventional standards, but perfect for us. I knew you two would end up together, Noah announced matter-of-factly on the drive home. I recorded the way Benjamin's voice changes when he talks about you. Classic physiological response to attraction. Noah, I exclaimed, mortified, while Benjamin laughed. Your son might have missed his calling as a detective, he teased. 6 months after the wedding confrontation, I received an unexpected visitor. Margaret, Kimberly's mother, stood on my front porch looking significantly less polished than when I'd last seen her. I know I have no right to be here, she began awkwardly. But I wanted to apologize for what I said about Noah. It was cruel and I was wrong. He's clearly exceptional. I neither invited her in nor sent her away, simply waiting for her to continue. Kimberly and I haven't spoken since she left Aaron, Margaret admitted. I'm trying to understand where things went so wrong with my daughter. Perhaps it starts with mothers like me, teaching the wrong values. Her self-awareness surprised me. We all make mistakes. Margaret. The question is whether we learn from them. Indeed, she agreed quietly. Well, I won't take more of your time. I just wanted you to know that I regret my behavior and words. As she turned to leave, I called after her, Margaret. Noah has a science fair next month. He's presenting research on memory techniques. You're welcome to attend if you'd like to see what he's capable of. Her expression softened with what might have been gratitude. I'd like that very much. I couldn't promise forgiveness or reconciliation. Those would take time and consistent effort, but I could offer a beginning. A year to the day after my father's death. We held the opening ceremony for the Howard Anderson Center for Learning Differences, funded by the foundation and housed in a renovated building near the community center where I still worked. The center would provide specialized tutoring, memory training, and advocacy for children who learned differently. Noah cut the ribbon, beaming with pride as local news cameras captured the moment. When a reporter asked what made this center special, he answered with the simple wisdom that continually amazed me. Everyone's brain works differently, he explained. Some people think that different means broken, but it's not. Sometimes the things that make school hard can make other things easier. Like how I remember every conversation I hear. That used to just make me seem weird, but now I know it's actually a superpower. Later that evening, as Benjamin helped Noah set up his telescope in the backyard, I found myself looking through my father's old photos. There was one of him holding Noah as a baby, looking at him with such wonder and love. I'd forgotten that expression. Had let Aaron's lies make me doubt the bond my father and son had shared. He would be so proud of you both, Benjamin said, finding me with the photo album open on my lap. Howard knew Noah was special, and he knew you were strong enough to weather any storm. I wasn't sure about that for a while, I admitted. But you kept going. You built a new life for yourself and Noah when it would have been easy to give up. That's real strength. Walking away from Aaron and the inheritance was actually the beginning, not the end. I reflected. I thought I was giving up, but really I was just making space for something better. We joined Noah in the backyard, where he was excitedly tracking Saturn through his telescope. The night was clear, the stars brilliant against the dark sky. My son, once labeled brainless by people who couldn't see his value, was now confidently explaining celestial mechanics to us. My phone chimed with a notification, a donation to the foundation from an anonymous source. The amount matched exactly what Aaron had initially taken from us. There was no message, no request for forgiveness or acknowledgement. Just a quiet act of beginning to make things right. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without mentioning it. Some healing happens in the spotlight, like Noah's triumphant moment at the wedding. Other healing happens privately, in small gestures and quiet moments of accountability. Mom, look. Noah called, adjusting the telescope. You can see Saturn's rings perfectly tonight. As I bent to look through the eyepiece at the beautiful, distant planet, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. We had weathered the storm of betrayal and loss and emerged stronger, more compassionate, and more aware of what truly mattered. What had my father said once? Family isn't always about blood, Audrey. It's about who stands beside you when the world turns its back. Looking at Benjamin and Noah, I knew I had found exactly that kind of family. Thank you all for watching this journey with me. If you've ever had to walk away from something toxic to find something better, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button to join our community of survivors and thrivers. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is turn away from what hurts you, even when it's family. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by the strength you find in starting over. Until next time, be kind to yourselves and each other.